Welcome to this video lecture on technology and innovation management. This video lecture is part of a course on business and management for postgraduate students at the University of Hamburg. In this set of video lectures, we will cover the ethics, responsibility, and sustainability of digital technologies. In this video lecture that you're watching, the focus will be on ethical issues surrounding digital technology. Start with, I brought an example that is somewhat dated by now. This is a poster that was used by the UN Women Foundation in around 2015. And it shows three women in front of a very typical Google search field where people can type in their search queries. And as you know, Google has a predictive filtering algorithm that tries to anticipate what you're likely searching for. And in this advertisement, in this poster, you see that people typed in women need to, women should not, women cannot. And you see that Google recommends certain likely search queries, such as women need to know their place, women shouldn't vote, women cannot be trusted. And if you want, you can do the same things with women need to, men should not, professors, it still works to this day, of course. So the point of this campaign, of course, was that they basically said, look, Google is racist. Sorry, not racist. Google is discriminating women. And, Google needs to be held accountable for it. At that time, Google responded with saying, we have a very basic algorithm. The algorithm just searches for what are the most often used search terms and then filters them by frequency and then sends them back to the user. So our algorithm isn't discriminating women. If at all, it's the data, and the data is whatever people have put in. So people discriminate women, but not the algorithm. This is the background story to this from the UN Women Foundation, if you want to read up on this. The point of this story is, of course, that we can run very, very quickly into ethical issues, and sometimes it gets very complicated to figure out. Is Google algorithms at fault? Are people at fault? And regardless of the answer, should or should not technologies then make it so easy to do what is obviously the morally wrong thing? So this is an example of an ethical issue that emerges around the use of technology, and it's sort of a basic one if you think about it. A very simple search algorithm, a search prediction algorithm, and a very old example for that. It's actually from 2013, as you can see here. It's 10 years old. Now, this brings me to this topic of ethics that I want to discuss. Now, broadly speaking, ethics is a branch of philosophy that addresses questions of morality, defined as the idea of distinguishing or being able to distinguish between good and bad, right and wrong, justice and injustice, virtue and evil. We use ethics a lot. Typically, when we refer to ethics, we actually refer to them as a set of moral obligations that define what is right or wrong to do in a particular community of practice or a profession. What doctors should or should not be doing, how professors should or should not behave, how we should treat or not treat women, and so forth, right? So a set of principles that distinguishes right behavior and wrong behavior to guide us in our choices and behaviors. Now, this is simpler than it sounds, because if you think about morality being ethical as distinguishing right from good or bad, the question is, of course, where do these principles come from? Yeah, so what does being ethical mean? And of course, you can study ethics and you can deep dive. This is a question that goes back for millennia, goes back to the ancient Greece, of course. For us here, it suffices to say there is no one capital T theory of ethics. There's no one theory that stipulates this is right, this is wrong, this is morals, this is what being ethical means. Instead, we have multiple schools of thoughts, multiple theories of ethics, and depending on which one you choose, you get slightly different answers to the question, what does being ethical mean? Now, I will introduce you to the three that are being most often referred to, especially in the context of technology or technology-enabled or induced behaviors. Yeah, one of them is the idea of consequentialist ethics. Second, deontological ethics, and third, the idea of virtue ethics. You probably have heard about some of them already. Consequentialist ethics is the idea of judging an action by its consequences. Yeah, so considering the consequences of an action to distinguish whether or not the action was right or wrong, good or bad, virtue uh, or evil. Yeah, so you would know this also sometimes being referred to as a I'm very bad today. Sorry, utilitarian perspective on ethics. Yeah, and captured in the saying, the quip, "The end justifies the means." So in this school of thought, the idea would be that an action that brings about more benefit than harm is good, and an action that causes more harm than benefit is not, and an action that causes benefit to more people is better than an action that causes benefit to fewer people. So to enact in this theory to be morally correct, but it's not enough to just improve the state of affairs. Not everything that makes the world better is necessarily morally correct. Instead, it also stipulates that there must have been no other available action that would have had better consequences. Yeah. So it's not as saying any end justifies the means, but rather any of the available acts, this one would have been the best for the most people and the one that causes the least harm. As an example, consider that lying, for most people would agree that lying is morally wrong, so it's unethical. But a consequentialist ethics would say that if telling a lie would be the only way to help save a person's life in some situation, gun to a head situation, then consequentialism would say it's the right thing to do. It's a morally correct choice to lie if that saves a person's life. There's some issues, of course, with this theory, as there are with any theory. One of the issues here is it doesn't actually stipulate what good results, good outcomes, good consequences are. This notion of good remains vague or remains open for interpretation. Also, of course, it has this relative tendency to it. So if we judge actions by the outcomes for majority, we do take into consideration that a minority might suffer, and it might suffer tremendously. So, for example, a consequentialist ethic might justify slavery as a morally okay choice if that maximized the well-being for a majority. Now, you can see here that on the consequentialist, that might sound legitimate, but for many people, for their moral compass, that still feels like a wrong choice to do, like an immoral thing to do. Now, a second big school of thoughts in ethics is deontological ethics. And you can see here with my images on the right-hand side, we associate this usually with the German philosopher Immanuel Kant and the Kantian imperative. Yeah, so again, this is an ethics theory that uses particular rules to discern the moral course of action. Yeah, so trying to figure out deontological meaning, that what is the dutiful thing to do? What are we supposed to be doing? And this is based on the idea, and unlike consequentialists, that there are something like universal moral laws. So there is some higher order maxim or principle that we should strive to abide by in our actions. Yeah, so examples would be like, we shouldn't lie, we shouldn't steal, we shouldn't cheat, we shouldn't kill. So these could be considered universal moral laws, and then we could judge an action to see whether or not it confirms or confronts these higher order maxims. So actions that align with universal moral laws are ethical, and actions that do not align with these universal moral laws are not. So that also means, in contrast to consequentialist ethics, that if an action doesn't conform to moral norms, they are wrong regardless of how positive their consequences might be. So even if lying saves a person's life, a consequentialist might say in that situation that's the right thing to do. In deontological ethics, it would say it is wrong, it's the wrong course of action regardless. It's the wrong thing to do. Now, the question here is, of course, how do we identify these universal moral laws? And this is where this Kantian imperative comes into play. Basically, it builds on this idea of universality and humanity aspect. One should only act according to a particular moral law if one could will that this principle or maxim underlying the action would become a universal law without creating a logical or practical contradiction. So the question to ask would always be, would you be willing to have this stipulated as a general law without exception to guide all action for all humans in all situations? Yeah, and there is a famous quip again with this that says, like, do unto others as you would have others do to you. That's typically how people memorize this Kantian imperative. So the question would always be, is the principle underlying a particular course of action or a choice, could this become a universal human law for all situations, all humans in all scenarios, everywhere? If so, then that's a universal moral law to follow. Again, with this theory, as with others, we have problems. One of the problems here is that following this could produce results that people find unacceptable. I gave you this example of not lying, even if it would save a person's life. If you think about a technology context, imagine that you're a software engineer and you learn that a nuclear missile is about to launch that might start a nuclear war. You have the abilities and skills, an opportunity to hack into the network and cancel the law, but of course it's against the code of ethics to break into any software system without permission. Deontology would advise us not to violate this rule because, of course, as a universal moral law, you don't want anyone to enter any system without permission. Yeah. On the other hand, in letting the missile launch, thousands of people or millions of people will likely die. So this would be a problem situation that would come from deontological ethics. And the third example, the third school of scholars that is broad and broadly accepted is virtue ethics. This states, it goes back basically to Aristotle, so again, it's a very old theory. The idea here is that all humans at all points should act virtuously. Yeah, so what does it mean? Virtuously means that we're not following rules as in deontology, deontological ethics, but rather we try to be as virtuous as possible by practicing being honest, brave, just, generous, and so forth. We're trying to be as virtuous as we can, and we're trying to improve our virtue, our virtuosity every day we do by being virtuous, by practicing doing the right thing. How do we act virtuously? First of all, we do so willingly, not under pressure or coercion or other types of situations. Yeah, so for example, if we don't have any other choice, then an act is not virtuous. It's just what we have to do, right? And because it's mandated, not necessarily willingly. Secondly, we must do so with honorable and virtuous intentions, not for the wrong reasons. Yeah, for example, out of ignorance, to avoid punishments, to cheat, to gain an advantage or anyone else, right? So if someone acts honestly because they're simply because they're afraid that they will be caught lying, that's not a virtuous act to do. We see this sometimes when you think about how sports stars act after they've been caught cheating or doping or anything like that. Then very often we see that they then act and speak very virtuously, but under virtue ethics, that would not be a virtuous thing to do. That's that they put on a face of being virtuous because they have been caught lying or stealing or doping or whatever, or they're afraid of doing so. Yeah. And third, of course, you must have sufficient knowledge. You must have information about the acts, your choices, and the consequences of that. Otherwise, you can't be virtuous by circumstance or happenstance. It must be an intentional thing to do. Now, that might still be confusing, but let me use one example to highlight the difference between these different ethics theories, these schools of thoughts. This example is actually from a book called Batman and Ethics by a philosopher called Mark White, a US philosopher. And he uses this example to go through different types of schools of thoughts of ethics. I'll focus here on the three main ones. And he actually refers to a scene from the movie The Dark Knight by Christopher Nolan. and I forgot the actor's name, doesn't matter. Yeah, so in this movie, the Batman has an opportunity to kill his arch enemy, the Joker, who's about to inflict pain on an entire city, hurting thousands and tens of thousands of people. So the ethical question is, should or should not Batman kill the Joker when he has the opportunity to do so? Now, a utilitarian, right, a consequentialist ethics person would say, kill the Joker. By taking this one life, you will save the lives of many others. So that is the morally appropriate or more appropriate choice to do. Yeah, if you let him live, you might actually end up, lots of people might suffer from that choice. A deontologist would say, don't kill the Joker. It's wrong killing people in general as a universal moral law. Killing is not like a moral thing to do. It's always wrong to kill people, regardless of the consequences. A virtue ethicist would conversely highlight the character of the person who kills the Joker. So is this person acts virtuously? Does this person try to become or be a virtuous person? Does Batman want to be the kind of person who takes his enemies' lives to succeed or to, save the world or whatever else? No, you wouldn't. That makes him a virtuous character. That makes him the good guy. The good guy tries to do the good thing and the right thing, regardless of the situation, and not take the easy way out. Yeah. So a virtue ethics will also say Batman shouldn't kill the Joker, and that's in fact what they did in the movie. Now, let's apply these different schools of thoughts to the situation of digital technology to highlight some of the ethical issues. I brought an example here from Australia, from digital technology used by banking in the context of gambling. Those of you that have been to Australia, gambling is more of a prominent phenomena there than it would be, for example, in Germany, where you don't see it as much, or not as overt as in Australia. But gambling is a phenomenon, and of course, it's a bad phenomenon. It has all sorts of social, health, financial hardship situation for many people. And banks have faced for a long time public criticism because they enable gambling behavior, basically because they, allow people to withdraw cash or use their credit cards in casinos, right? So most of these gambling stations, games, or machines, you can operate with a credit card. So in Australia, most of the banks allow gambling transactions on their credit cards, but one of these banks recently implemented a gambling reduction program. So they built a digital technology to identify problem gamblers. This technology operated on machine learning that they train on credit card data. For example, cash balances, cash withdrawal histories, purchases of alcohol on the credit card, location data, so whether or not people were in a casino, for example, and all sorts of socioeconomic and demographic information the bank had available, such as, residence, regular income, job, stuff like that. So with this data, they trained an algorithm to identify problem gamblers, people that use the credit card for gambling and might have a gambling problem. So the question is then, well, what do you do with this data or with this identification of problem gamblers? They launched two types of interventions, hard and soft interventions. A hard intervention was that they then imposed daily withdrawal limits to cap spending. They could cancel your credit card. They could reject your loan applications if you try to a different service from the bank. That would be a hard intervention. A soft intervention that they also implemented was to promote products through their banking app that would be safe and more conservative than maybe comparable other products they might have to these particular types of customers. What that means is that basically in the app that a problem gambler would see, they would see slightly different, let's say, loan products or account products or card products that other people would normally see, namely basically the more risk-averse options. Excuse me. Now we can look at this case now from the view of these three ethical theories to understand whether or not the implementation of such an algorithmic technology to identify problem gamblers and the launch of certain interventions at these people is a morally or ethically right thing to do. So what you see here is that these three different schools of thoughts, deontology, virtue, and consequentialist ethics, first of all, they would start off with slightly different questions. The root question in consequentialist or utilitarian ethics would be, well, is this initiative by the bank, the launch of this algorithmic identification intervention program, is this overall increasing the well-being of the people? And deontologists would ask, is this bank's initiative consistent with its higher maxims, moral duties? The virtue ethic would ask, well, does this bank's initiative enhance or inhibit the users to act virtuously? Yeah, does it enhance a customer's capacity to exhibit and develop virtue in their actions and choices? You can, if you read the paper, you can go through the analytical approach that you would try to follow to answer these types of questions. But for the purpose of lecture, let's have a look at the conclusions here. So, for example, what this initiative does, of course, it reduces the capacity of problem gamblers to use the credit card, right? Remember, you can withdraw less money. The credit card might be canceled. They might not be able to get loans because the loan applications get rejected. They might not actually get risky loans to begin with because of the soft intervention. What that, of course, does is that for the majority of people, the social, health, and financial issue that is gambling is reduced, right? You have less gamblers, the gamblers use less money, those around them endure less health, financial, or other types of social hardship because of that, right? So in aggregate, the initiative enhanced the well-being of the majority of customers, right? So from a utilitarian perspective, this initiative is a great thing to do. It's ethical. And deontology would ask, well, is the bank's initiative consistent with its moral duties, right? With duties that would be universal and humane laws. Now, here the question is the bank allowing or inhibiting a person to act based on their free will and their autonomy, for example, right? Autonomy, freedom, people are allowed to do with their money as they please. And here we would have an initiative that would undermine free will, and it would undermine autonomy, right? It would undermine equality too, because you will not get the same options as everybody else. For example, you don't get the same loan, you don't see the same product being offered. It undermines your autonomy. For example, you can withdraw less money. Whether it be for gambling or otherwise, remember, right? It's not that you can withdraw less money for gambling, you can withdraw less money overall. And also your free will is basically, your freedom is reduced because they might cancel your credit card and you can't do all the things that other people can do. So all of these are, of course, the question here is the universality of it all. All these interventions would not be just restricted to the gambling context, right? They would be in principle. In principle, you see different, less risky loan offers. You can't choose the same products. You can't withdraw the same amount of money or as much money as you want. Your credit card might be canceled. You can't use it for any purpose. So as a universal human moral principle underlying these actions, the deontologists would say it's an unethical thing to do because you're undermining some fundamental principles that most people around the planet would agree on are universal moral laws, namely freedom, autonomy, for example. Now, virtue ethics is a third example of how we do this. Virtue ethics was asking the question, well, how does it impact a person's capacity to develop virtue, to be virtuous in their own right? From this perspective, the initiative actually, is paternalistic in a way. Like it takes over some of that responsibility of doing the right thing from you, right? It reduces your amount of the amount of cash you can withdraw. It doesn't allow you to take on the same loans or as risky a loan or a loan under certain conditions that may or may not be a good choice for you. So it basically makes some of these decisions for you. And in so doing, it compromises your own ability to practice virtue by trying to do the right things and doing the honest, brave, just, and right things that you can do because someone else does them for you, right? So here, the capacity to develop and exhibit virtue is compromised on the individual level. The person itself is limited in their ability to even try to be virtuous, yeah? Because that person from there on in, if given a choice, for example, should I withdraw $5,000 to play gambling or not? If I have that choice, I can do the virtuous thing and not do that, or I can do, the brave and honest and the right thing, or I cannot. But if someone takes that option away from me, I can never be virtuous, right? Because it would have to be my choice under all the knowledge, free willing and acting out of my own free will. Now, it also says here at the collectivist level, the ethical standing of the initiative is mixed. It's a bit difficult to argue because on the one hand, we are on the individual level, we're taking some of that capacity away from people. But of course, we're enhancing the collective, like, for example, the immediate family and friends, the social circle, to do the right thing. We're also helping the people overall to do the right thing because we sort of, more or less forcefully coercing them to move away from the non-virtuous thing, which is, ruin their life through gambling. So it's a bit mixed from this angle. So the whole point of this exercise is that the point about ethics around digital technologies can be very complicated to answer. It depends on the viewpoints where you all started from: utilitarian, deontological, and virtue-based ethics. So, and this is basically allowing me to summarize this. This was a brief example for only one problem group, but of course we see now that technologies increasingly support and make decisions with very, very material consequences. We use algorithms for hiring, for firing, for loan decisions, of course, like in the banking situation. We even use them for sentencing and court decisions. Yeah, so we use algorithms to determine how long an individual spends in prisons. These are all examples of choices where we use technologies, and the choices have very, very material consequences on people's lives. Yeah, so whether or not you get the loan to build a house, whether or not you actually have to go to jail for how long, whether or not you get that job, whether or not you have to leave that job, and so forth. So whether or not this was ever intended like this, whether or not they were anticipated, intended, or desired to do so, digital technologies in many situations, create moral consequences to the good or to the bad. They reinforce or undercut ethical principles, as this example of the 3 schools of ethics. Depending on where you sit, the technology will either be a really good thing to do or a really bad thing to do. And it enables or diminishes stakeholder rights and dignity. Remember, in this case of the gambling technology, it identifies the problem gamblers. You can say, look, it enables their dignity because it kind of forces them to gamble less and get less in the hardship situations. Or, of course, you can say, look, it really diminishes your own freedom and volatility to do as you please with your money. I'll give you one more example from this. This is a more recent example from, I believe, 2020, based on an initiative right next door in the Netherlands, where Netherlands implemented in 2 pilot tests in Rotterdam and in Amsterdam. They used a new technology, a predictive policing algorithm. Now, I'm an old person and I have seen the movie Minority Report, which is a movie from 2001, I think, with Tom Cruise in it. And you may or may not have seen this, but it's the same situation. In Minority Report and in this actual real-life case here, the point was to use an algorithm to predict a crime that hasn't happened yet, right? And then, Tom Cruise and his team were the crew that was sent to a place where crime hadn't even occurred yet, and, sort of stop the murderer before he murdered anyone. So this was the movie plot from 2001. In 2020, predictive policing was a real thing in the Netherlands. Yeah. So they used a particular system called CAS, which operated the following way. They took a map of a city, let's say Amsterdam or Rotterdam, as I said, and these 2 cities was trialed, and divided into 125 square meter squares, right? Little squares of these little places. And for each of these places, they accrued a number of variables, in particular historical crime data, right? So they had technical variables like where is it, what is the location, and so forth. And 47 what they call predictive variables, so variables they used later in their predictive policing algorithm. Out of these, 19 were population level. In this 125 square meter square, How many one-person households do we have? What is the average house price? What is the average age of the residents? How many social benefit recipients do we have here? How many non-Western immigrants live in this particular square? And this data they basically got from the Dutch Census Bureau, right? So population level data that you would get. That would just stipulate this is the socioeconomic status of a particular region, in this particular case of a 125 square meter block. And they added to this, based on their own police information system, 28 crime-specific variables, such as number of burglaries occurring in this block over the last year, what is the time since the last crime, what type of crime was it, and so forth. Then this algorithm threw all of these 47 variables into a logistic regression model. A logistic regression model basically has an outcome of 0 or 1. Yes or no, black or white, right? It predicted, is a crime likely to occur or not? And you get a random probability between 0 and 1. Yeah, 0%, 100%. And these percentages were then transformed into graphical probabilities, and they use that to color code the map. And this is what you can see here in the screenshot. You can see there in the sort of middle right corner, there's a red quadrant saying that particular block, it's very likely for a crime to occur, I don't know, let's say next Saturday. And as you can imagine, this received, they trialed this and used this, and there's actually a study about this, and it looks at how actually these machine learning data scientists then work with the local police force in acting based on these recommendations here, right? Which you hopefully agree can have very moral consequences, right? So, this will really has a material impact on people's lives if this algorithm says there's a crime likely to occur. And it's ethically, let's say, queasy. It could be that next Saturday you have 1,000 stormtroopers in front of your door protecting something that may or may not happen. Or, of course, it might be that, you're under constant scrutiny, which might be a good thing or a good bad thing, depending on how you look at it. The point that I wanted to highlight here a little bit is, of course, that this pilot project was eventually stopped, also because the way that this algorithm operated was fairly unethical. If you look at this, you have here biased data, or you have variables in here that we know are statistically correlated with crimes for a number of reasons, and some of them were because of biases and prejudice and so forth, right? So number of social benefit recipients, number of immigrants, number of one-person households, like sort of, house prices, which is an indicator of the socioeconomic status. Yeah, so low income, lots of immigrants, number of people on the dole on social benefit schemes, are more correlated with higher crime rates, but of course it's not a causation, right? So, you can't say that anyone that meets these criteria is automatically more likely to engage in crime, but that's exactly what this algorithm did, right? So you see here, that's led to quite a lot of ethical issues, not only about the actual police action that was about to unfold because of the prediction, but also in how the prediction was generated. So in wrapping up, you see that we have quite a number of ethical issues around moral consequences of actions, about the way that we even judge the morality or the ethicality of digital technologies. And just as a final point, I wanted to highlight 4 known ethical issues that I haven't touched upon yet, that we've known from information and communication technology, with digital technology producing and processing information for the last 50 years or so, and you will have heard about all of them. They're known as PAPA, P-A-P-A. Yeah, one of them is the issue of privacy. Yeah, so whether or not technology that contains or processes information, under what conditions, with what safeguards can we reveal this information about oneself, one association, about our relationship to others, and so forth. Yeah, so the question about, in the age of technology, what things can we keep to ourselves and not be forced to reveal to others? That was, again, very big in the age of social media, right? When Facebook and Twitter and so forth came up. Now it seems to be very much blurred into the background, and everyone's quite happy to be on Instagram. Accuracy. What about the authenticity, fidelity, and accuracy of information processed by digital technology, and who is responsible for that? If we see more and more algorithms like the predictive policing algorithms, or a credit risk scoring algorithm used by a bank, who's accountable and responsible for what information this algorithm processes, whether or not that is accurate, authentic, of high fidelity, correct, maybe outdated, untimely, and so forth. Who's accountable, who's responsible, and who can I blame, who can I litigate if there is an error with it, and how do I even find out? Third, of course, with technologies leaving data, datafying our existings, who owns a lot of this information? What about the information that is acquired, processed, or maybe even produced by digital technologies? Who owns the data about my browsing history in Mozilla Firefox, for example? And finally, accessibility, the issue about what are the rights and privileges to obtain information through digital technologies? Most technologies at the moment, you need eyesight, you need the capacity to actually operate input and output devices, let's say keyboards and mouse, or smart devices with touch screens and stuff like this. Of course, not all people on the planet have these accessibility privileges. What about them? This brings us to the end of this initial lecture on the ethical issues surrounding digital technologies, and I hope you learned there are quite a few of them. And in the following lectures, we will deal into some aspects of them in more detail. Thanks for watching, and thanks for listening.